I don't remember his name. Wait, hold on.
Sunday. What's Sunday got to do with it?
Sorry? No, I haven't. Do you want to summarise his work for me? I'm guessing you have.
I wouldn't be able to put it in a comprehensive way.
Okay, give your best shot.
Well, no, I think it's best that I just share the video.
Yeah, fair enough.
I wouldn't want to mischaracterize what you said. I also don't feel like I'm in a position to do it. But I'll share it with you.
That's absolutely fine.
I just wanted to say that I super respect your work, by the way.
What's your name, bro?
From a Muslim, I do respect your work a lot. Emir.
Thank you very much, Emir.
I just think it's a healthy debate.
Yeah.
I'm not siding with anyone. I think God gave us reason to listen to arguments and then we judge for ourselves. But it's nice to hear two sides of the argument. And
I totally think that is what Speaker's Corner is meant to be about.
I want to be recorded by it.
So put the cameras on me, guys. Yeah. And blur out that little bit when you had him.
Stand there so I can get you short.
Okay. So
I'm just getting Bob, yeah.
So I would say to you.
I'm gonna shoot from the back.
Bro, he says he doesn't want to be on camera. I can't make.
So I can pick up his voice.
I can't do anything about that. So my point to you is that I agree with you. People should use their reason. And I would suggest to you two things. Firstly, if Jesus Christ was really crucified, absolutely Islam is false. Secondly, there are 11 non-disputable facts that happened in the first century. The historians agree about. These, if the Quran was true, the Quran and Muslims don't have an answer for all of those facts. They have an answer for 3, they don't have an answer for others. But the fact that those historical events are true presents a problem for Islam. Because they are true, it means that if the Quran was true, they should not have happened. But they did happen, which strongly suggests that the Quran is false. Right? And so these facts are these. Christ was crucified. Christ was buried. The apostles were in despair about the fact that their Lord was crucified. The tomb a few days later was found empty. The first Christians taught that they experienced a literally risen Jesus Christ. They made that the central part of their message. Because they made that the central part of their message, the Christian movement was born. That they started to venerate Sunday as opposed to Saturday as a holy day of veneration. That James, who doubted that Jesus was the Messiah, became a Christian. That Paul, who persecuted the church, became a Christian. And that they, and I can't remember the 12th or the 11th, but there you've got a whole bunch of facts that, if the Islamic story was true, cannot be accounted for. There's no explanation as to why these things happened. But they did happen. And because they happened, it actually presents a proof that the Islamic story is false. Now you need to use your reason and investigate that claim.
I will go away. I look at this diligently, but I'm not in a place to debate.
That is absolutely fine. Let me give you a gift. I always like sincere people.
But if the gift could be with an email to share this content with you.
Yeah, I'll give you my email as well. That's absolutely.
You come across open enough as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look at things.
Amir, have you got a Bible?
No, I actually do have a Bible. Yeah.
You have a Bible. Let me give you something else then. If you've already got a Bible, there's no point me giving you a Bible.
When you finish with Bob, can I engage with you just on the mic, not on the camera?
I can hear your voice. I'm here really as a spectator.
Yeah, but it's good to hear you're spectating what you think of being at Speaker's Corner. Oh, we can't see you because I'm focused on him. No problem. This I ask you.
Okay, bro. Let me give you a little gift. Sorry. Bear with us 1 second. There you go. You can read that over a cup of coffee. It'll take you minutes.
Great. Bob, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I'll be here next Sunday anyway.
All right, let's talk next Sunday. Yeah, absolutely. More than welcome. Yes. Yes, of course. God bless.
You mentioned like 11 facts.
Yeah, 12.
12 facts.
Yeah.
One of them, for example, would be like you said it was buried, for example.
Yeah, it was buried.
You said it's indisputable. Can you just like walk through the evidence of
Okay, So I don't know, bro. I don't think so. So in answer to your question, why is it an indisputable fact that Christ was Christ was buried, right?
For example.
I'm going to give you. So here's the reasons. If you look at Roman law about how to treat those who are punished, or if you look at the writings of Josephus Flavius, that talks very explicitly about what happened to crucified souls, and then you cross-reference that with Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Paul. They all the two sources, like the Dagesta, the Roman law, and the writings of Josephus show that burying was normative even for condemned criminals.
So it just fits the background.
Yeah, it gives a background paradigm into which Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all state Christ was buried.
And they're all independent.
And they're independent and they're early. So it's all first century documentation, it's all first century evidence, and except for the Roman law, which is second century, but it's talking about what happened before. And the fact is, if you've got independent early evidence all stating something about history, historians have no reason to doubt it.
So what we have, like four gospels.
And Paul's writings.
And Paul's writings.
Yeah.
And they're all independent. They're not relying on each other. They're saying Jesus was buried, and in addition to that, it just fits the context of that's how Romans used to do things.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it independent. That's what makes it
Yeah.
strong.
So the context is the writings of Josephus Flavius, the writings of Roman law about how to deal with criminals, but also you've got a third piece of evidence, which in 1968 they found an ossuary. An ossuary is a burial box.
Okay.
And it was a burial box, and on the ossuary it says, these are the remains of Johanan, who was crucified by Pontius Pilate. And inside the box you find an ankle bone, and on the ankle bone you can still see the nail of crucifixion. So what you've got is two non-Christian documents and a historical, archaeological evidence that all demonstrate that the crucified were buried. And then in addition to that, you have 5 sources, independent, that state that Christ was crucified and that he was buried. So that's why no one disputes that Christ was buried.
So for example, if I say it's buried, it's because you have 5 sources, Paul, the Gospels, and you have Josephus, and let's talk about that's how it normally used to happen.
Yes, and Roman law, and an ossuary box, which is also background evidence.
And then you also said the tomb was found empty.
Yes, so the tomb was found
That's
empty.
also an indisputable fact.
Yes, so for instance, Bart Ehrman, for instance, he tries to dispute the fact that there was an empty tomb, right? Historians, actual historians like Dr. Mike Lacona, basically say that Dr. Bart Ehrman doesn't know how to do history, right? The reality is that even Dr. Bart Ehrman agrees that in the first century, the first followers of Jesus believed that they had seen the risen Jesus Christ. And the question that anyone who doubts this has to answer is, why did they become convinced?
Okay, so is the empty tomb based on them later believing that they saw Christ?
No, they believed because they saw an empty tomb and because they had seen the risen Jesus.
So the empty tomb is based on what?
Their experience.
So it's based on what they said. Is it in the New Testament?
Yeah, it's in the New Testament. But the thing that you've got to understand is that these beliefs about the resurrection of Jesus predate the New Testament. People don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus because of the New Testament. They write the New Testament because they believe in the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, no, I understand what you're trying to say. I'm just trying to understand what you said. What they're indisputable.
Yeah.
So they're indisputable historically.
Yeah.
Because
if you're going to dispute something historically, what you need to do is come up with a hypothesis that explains the facts. And then you've got to present evidence for your hypothesis.
What are the facts that tell us that the tomb was empty?
Right. So the facts that the tomb was empty is this.
Okay.
paradigmatically, in first century Judaism, Second Temple Judaism, when a prophet or someone who was a great teacher died, right, the custom was to venerate the tomb. Christ himself accuses the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he says that the death of every prophet from Abel to John the Baptist will be poured upon this generation because you venerate the tombs of the prophets who you acknowledge that your forefathers killed. And Jewish writings outside of the New Testament also testify to the fact that Jews would venerate the tomb of a great teacher. So if Jesus Christ died and his followers believed that he was a great teacher, but he didn't rise from the dead, in that cultural milieu, what would be the most natural thing for them to do?
They just venerate the grave.
They just venerate the grave.
Yeah.
But they don't. Now what they go on to do is to proclaim that Christ had risen from the dead. That's your first evidence. Your second evidence is that the claims about Jesus' resurrection was not the only claim that was made in the first century. There was an alternative argument that was made from the first century that the apostles stole the body. And that continued even into the 3rd century. Christians reference the fact that Jews are still saying that Christ's body was stolen. But what is that an admission of? If you're saying that someone stole the body, you're saying that it was in a tomb and that the tomb was empty. So that's your second evidence. Okay? So this is the reason why we have good, solid reasons to believe that that tomb was empty.
The tomb was empty because it goes against what was normally the case.
Yes. And it was also empty because we know from Flavius and from Roman law that it was normative to bury those that had died. And we also know that the Gospels and the writings of Paul all testify to the burial.
I just wanted to know that.
Yeah, that's fine.
What was the other one?
So that was one example. Another example is that the early Christians, the Jewish Christians, venerated Sunday as a holy day. Now, you don't sound like an ignorant man. What is the holy day for the Jews? Saturday,
right?
the Sabbath.
Okay, yes.
So why would you start venerating the first day of the week as a special day? Good question. Well, Christians have an answer to that question. It's because they believe in the resurrection. The story is true. So Jesus was never crucified. It was someone else, right? And whatever happened to this other body, not to Jesus. Why then, if that's true, do people believe that Jesus rose from the dead? And why do they start to venerate a Sunday? From the Islamic perspective, what reason is there for that to happen? Let's ask this Jew.
I'm ignorant.
Tell me, here's a Jew, right? Is there any Jewish reason that you can think of in the Torah or in the prophets for Jews to venerate the Sunday as a special day? None.
Seventh day, the Sabbath, Saturday.
Right.
Friday night, 4th of Saturday.
There you go. No reason. Right? But the first Jewish Christians started to do it. Why? Well, I have an answer. It's called the resurrection. The Qur'an has no answer for the fact. The fact of the Jewish Christians venerating a Sunday makes no sense if the Qur'an is true. But the fact is still there. The fact is that the Jewish Christians do venerate the Sunday, and there's no Quranic reason for them to do so.
What is the evidence that they venerated on a Sunday? Is it based on any...
Great question. The evidence is that if you read the book of Acts, which is a first century document written by Christians, talking to Christians about what Christians did, they state that they would gather in one another's homes on the Lord's day and break bread. So it states very clearly on the first day of the week, the Lord's day, they would gather and celebrate their Christian faith. That's first century evidence. It's not just that though. You also have church tradition. In the Didache or in the writings of the church fathers, Sunday is held up as an important day. So we've got that from 1st and 2nd and 3rd century documentation about the practices of Christians. This is why no historian disputes the fact that Christians venerated Sunday as a holy day. But as you just heard from my Jewish friend, there's no Jewish reason to do that. which means that something happened to those Jews that convinced them that Sunday was a special day. If the Quran is true, then there is no reason for that to happen, but it did happen.
Does the Quran dispute that particular
Yeah, the
thing?
Quran says Jesus was never crucified.
Okay.
And if he was never crucified, he was never
all those
resurrected.
things didn't happen.
All of those things didn't happen, but they did happen. And since they did happen, you've got a problem for the Quran. Because history is demonstrating that the Quran is talking fiction when it says Christ was not crucified and he didn't rise from the dead. Do you understand the argument?
I understand the argument. What's the other one? What was the other one?
So we've talked about the veneration of a Sunday.
Yeah.
The second one is that the very first Christians all proclaimed that they had literally seen Christ rise from the dead. There is no reason for them to do so if the Quran is true.
No, I'm not talking about Quran. Let's put the Quran. Like, for example, like, what is the basis of that? You said again, is that based on the New Testament?
Okay,
evidence?
right.
Based
So,
on Josephus?
right. So it's not based on the New Testament evidence. Remember,
Yeah. Or is it based?
Christians don't believe in the resurrection because of the New Testament. They write the New Testament because of the resurrection.
Because of that.
Because of the resurrection.
But what you said is that, for example, them believing that
Yes.
they saw, that's a historical fact.
That is a historical fact, yes.
So then what would be the historical evidence for
Right,
that fact?
so the historical evidence is this. The fact that the church proclaimed the resurrection, which is in an indisputable historical fact, the fact that the church did that, right, and then went on to write about it in their Gospels and write about it in their letters of Paul, demonstrates that that is a belief that predates the New Testament. It predates Paul.
So what the historical fact is that they believe they saw
The resurrection, and they went on to teach it.
okay.
So, no, the thing is, you don't just have to take my word for it. Even scholars that doubt the resurrection do not doubt that the first apostles had an experience that was transformative.
What the historians would say, I think, is they would say that there were people that believed that.
Yes.
So that would be the historical fact. you
Great.
said.
That is exactly what I'm saying. Right? So my point
And
is,
that belief is recorded where?
in the Gospels and in the writings of Paul,
Oh, there you go.
and then in the writings of the church fathers. So my point to you is, and this is so my point to you is, the question that you have to answer is, given the fact that they did believe that, the question is, why? Now the problem for you as a Muslim is this: if the Quran is true, then there was no reason for them to believe that at all, because Jesus was never crucified, and therefore he could never have risen from the dead.
I don't know much about the Quranic
That's fine.
fiction, but
That's fine.
I just wanted to know what is it based on, because
Yeah.
what would you say, for example, is there like evidence within the text? Because I'm sure like the Muslims here will say to you that all the Gospels are unreliable.
Yeah.
So would there be something that would like override that, for example? Like
Yes.
you say this particular aspect is
Yes.
this, okay, you can dispute
Yes.
all of it, but this particular aspect is solid.
The reason why Muslims say that you don't need to believe the Gospels aren't true is because they don't get history. And they don't deal with this historical fact. The historical fact is, Christians didn't believe in the resurrection because someone wrote the Gospels. They wrote the Gospels because they believed in the resurrection. So when a Muslim says, when a Muslim says, well, we can't trust the Gospels, the reality is that's actually irrelevant to the question of the resurrection. The belief in the resurrection predates the Gospels.
I understand.
And I'll give you an example to that, to prove that, to demonstrate that. Paul writes his letters to churches. And one of the churches that he wrote to was the church in Rome. This church was not founded by Paul. So he wrote to Christians that he did not start about beliefs that they had, which means that they had that belief before he wrote the letter to them, and that demonstrates that the belief predates the letter.
Okay, and did they share the same beliefs as him?
About the resurrection, yes.
All right.
So there's your evidence.
That's fine. Okay. Just what did you say the other one was? You said there's 12, right? For
There's
example.
12, yeah. So another
All of them kind of like linked to some background
event.
They
are.
They're all kind of based on like, oh, this is what Jews would believe. First Christian Jews would believe, and it's contrary to them.
Yes.
And therefore that gives more credence to the idea that this happened.
Absolutely.
That's the style of the argument.
It's called paradigmatic models. So let me explain what a paradigmatic model is.
Okay.
If someone came to you as a Muslim, a believing Muslim, and said, I've got evidence that the Quran has been changed, what is your instinctive reaction to that statement?
Just prove it. It's not true.
It's not true. That's because you have a paradigmatic model about what is true. Let me give you another example. If someone walked up to you and said, white people are superior to black people, what would you say to that statement?
It's not true.
It's not true, because you have a paradigmatic model that states that's not true. Let's imagine you were in a field or in the desert somewhere.
I get it. You're saying that the early Christian Jews believed in a certain thing. They had a certain
Way of thinking. Yes.
that was then broken.
Bingo.
That was then broken by this.
Yes. So my point to you is, the paradigmatic model of first century Jews in Second Temple Judaism did not allow for the idea of an individual resurrection prior to the general resurrection. Nobody believed that. It was impossible. It's like someone coming to you and saying, the Quran's been changed. It's impossible in your worldview. But these first Jews did come to believe that. And so the question is, why?
And so you're saying the most plausible reason is that the resurrection did happen.
Absolutely.
And
That is the answer. Now, the thing is, when you've got these historical facts, Christians can give one answer that explains all the facts all at once, without stretching the evidence, without reinterpreting the evidence, without ignoring the evidence. Muslims, according to the Quranic narrative, can only account for 3 of those facts. That Christ was crucified because someone looked like Jesus.
Okay.
That Christ died and was buried because someone looked like Jesus.
Okay.
Right? And that the apostles were distraught that their teacher had died. The Quranic narrative can explain those 3 facts because someone like Jesus was crucified. And everybody believed that that was Jesus. But they can't explain the rest.
Can't explain Sunday.
They can't explain the Sunday. They can't explain the empty tomb. They can't explain the centrality of the resurrection to the message of the church. They can't explain the fact that this message was the birth of the church. They can't explain the fact that Jesus' resurrection was proclaimed in the same city that everybody knew he died in.
In the same city? Okay.
Jerusalem.
Okay.
Yeah, the resurrection was proclaimed in a city where people had witnessed the crucifixion. Right? But yet the people, and they can't explain the fact of the veneration of the Sunday. They can't explain the fact that James, who was a skeptic about Jesus, the half-brother of Jesus, became a founding father of the church. James, the brother of Jesus. He became the leader of the church in Jerusalem after Peter went off to do missionary work. And they can't explain that Paul, who was a persecutor of the church, became a Christian. All of those events can be explained if you believe in the resurrection. None of them can be explained if you don't believe that Jesus was resurrected. But they did happen.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was trying to get back to. Like, what would all of those facts I wanted to ask you were, what is it all based on?
Yeah.
And so I get it now.
Yeah.
Because you said 12 indisputable facts, and a lot of them are based on the Jewish background.
Yes, very much so. That's actually really key to the entire argument. Is that my argument makes more sense when you understand first century Judaism.
So what do you say to those Muslims that say, I don't believe it, all your sources are corrupt anyway?
Right.
That would